Okay.
Thanks for joining. This is Willamette Week's House District 39 endorsement interview. We are joined by Representative Janelle Bynum, and your opponent did not respond to our request, so she's not here. But if we could just begin by having you introduce yourself, tell us a little about yourself and why you're running for office.
So good morning. I am Janelle Bynum. I am a working mother of four, an electrical engineer, small business owner, and I currently serve as House District 51 state representative. And I currently represent the communities of East Portland, Damascus, Gresham, Boring, North Clackamas, and Happy Valley. The new district that I'm running to serve is House District 39, which includes most of Happy Valley now, not a split portion, portions of Milwaukee, North Clackamas, Oregon City, and Damascus. The things I care about most are right now are mental health, small businesses, education always, and a high quality of life. And that's a little fuzzy, but I think it's time for us to start talking about that, and I think housing and homelessness would fall under that umbrella.
What would you say are over the past couple of years, have been your biggest legislative priorities, and maybe name a bill or two that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, so I have a few. Near and dear to my heart is the Crown Act, which allows people to come to work and to school wearing their natural hair, and that's particularly important in the African American community. And I can say this summer my daughter worked at OHSU, and it was just delightful for her to be able to wear her braids with sparkle tinsel in them and feel like she could come to work as her whole self. So that's one. The House Bill 2949, which is a $70+ million mental health bill, growing the number of mental health providers in the state is another. And I mean, I have a list. Those are two that I think are really important to me, in addition to the police, the public safety bills that we passed over the past couple of sessions, 23 or so public safety bills. And then finally, there was the first test of the unlawful summoning bill, which led to a $4.4 million verdict when a person was on the receiving end of having the police called on them for not a good reason. So,
could you just help us with the big suite of public safety bills that you have brought? Are you finished with that work, or do you have another big bill or a group of bills that you'd like to bring in the coming session?
So I think what was so monumental about that was it was a heavy lift. It was a bipartisan lift. And I think it's going to take some years to work through the rulemaking, which is kind of technical speak. Mm-hmm. But how do we implement those policies? And so I try to lead with values on those. And so DPSST, the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, is working through the rules on a lot of those. And I'm in constant communication with the Chiefs and Sheriffs Association as to how they are implementing those rules at the departmental level. So
the police misconduct database, was that part of that suite of bills?
Yeah. And I believe that one was scaled back from what we originally put on the table. I think it's hard to say exactly how everything will be implemented. The one that's really being worked on right now is the statewide standards and for conduct, and so that's where the public testimony is taking place and the rulemaking is taking place. And I'm actually getting a play-by-play from a woman whose son or daughter was killed by a police department and won a large settlement, and so she has a very strong interest in these statewide standards. The goal of that is to make sure that the expectations, for instance, in Clackamas County are the same as they are in Jefferson County. So that's where my head's been.
I mean, that sounds like a huge lift, because I imagine there's a lot of discrepancies between how police departments, handle things. I mean, what kind of pushback are you getting for that? And I mean, is there room for pushback anymore? Or at this point, is it like, this is happening, we just got to figure out how now?
So the rules, the bills are passed.
Okay.
Now we're in implementation stage, right? And so, so first I should just let you know, I'm not the judiciary chair anymore, and Representative Noble is transitioning out of the legislature. So, in theory, what's supposed to happen is these agencies take the bills that we make, examine legislative intent, and work to write the implementable part of the bill itself. So that's where the values come in. That's where the work that we've done to put legislative intent on record, build the legislative record, and make sure that they follow it. And I think that there are enough citizens out there watching, pointing back to what we've said on the record as what the intent was.
So when will those laws take place?
There was a staggered implementation. Some were immediate, some were January 1st after the bill is signed, some were 90 days.
As far as, I mean, your new district, and I know there's some overlap, but what do you see as the differences in the needs between your former district and what you're running for now?
Well, it's certainly hillier, first of all. It's,
Gotta get an e-bike.
An e-bike, I have a fear of falling, so I don't know if I can do that. The difference is that it's all Clackamas County, so it's not a mix of Multnomah and Clackamas, and it leans Democratic, but Clackamas Democrats tend to be socially progressive and fiscally conservative. So they really do want you to ask questions about how money is being spent. They have talked about public safety, not as things that are directly in their face all the time, but they want compassion when it comes to dealing with our homelessness problem, but they also want practical responses. And I would say those are kind of the biggest differences. They care a lot about education. It's non-negotiable for them. If you go into a North Clackamas school, you can see that people really invest in their kids, and it doesn't matter where they are on the socioeconomic spectrum.
Is there any real difference between your former district and this district as far as like one racial composition and then two socioeconomic status?
I can tell you that this district, I believe, has about 14% Asian families, which is significant. And I believe it's about 8% Latino families. The prior district, the numbers weren't that high. It was, mostly, white Oregonians, but still very diverse, but in much smaller chunks.
And you mentioned that, they're kind of socially progressive and fiscally conservative. That's sort of how that's a bit of your reputation, right? In Salem, is that you're socially progressive, but a little bit more fiscally moderate?
That's probably pretty accurate.
Yeah.
I don't like to spend money just for the sake of spending money, and I think the people have the best grip on how to spend their own money. And I believe social justice is economic justice. And so when you can pay your own bills and you can send your kids, they can play soccer or whatever, without having to ask for the waiver. They can buy food in the grocery store without counting every penny. That, to me, is social justice. It's not creating every kind of social program so that the government has a say-so on what kind of food you eat, when you eat it, how you can afford it.
Are you talking about a specific type of program, or?
No, I just, I just think about the freedom that you have when you get to decide, what to feed your family. So, for instance, I got a call this summer. This is October, yeah. So it was this summer about a WIC voucher, and I think it was Walmart in that was near my district wasn't taking WIC vouchers for formula. Well, it wasn't because they were being a bad corporate entity. It was because they were not approved to to take that voucher at that store because it didn't have the right mix of groceries. Now, from a consumer standpoint, like, I don't really care. I just need to feed my baby. But the government has certain rules that sometimes make it impractical for people to live normal lives. And so we had to have this whole conversation about whether that was even practical or not, and what was the social aim of setting those types of parameters.
Where do you think where do you think Oregon is overreaching as far as personal liberty, or where you can spend your money when?
Where is it overreaching? You know, that's probably a better question for me to ask my constituents, because I don't experience life the same way that everybody else does. I feel like Oregon doesn't protect me personally in some ways that it should, and so I don't experience life necessarily from an overreach standpoint. I experience it from an underreach more often than not.
So,
Go ahead. I was just going to ask a Measure 110 question, but that's my bailiwick.
I'm curious. You've accomplished a lot in your time in the legislature, and you've had a lot of. There's been a lot going on in Salem during that time. I'm wondering what you've learned, what hard lesson you've learned by either making a mistake or not realizing something that you now know.
If a lobbyist doesn't like your bill or your position, they can or will, if you're in the House, they can or will go to the Senate. They can or will usurp your authority and go to the leaders, and sometimes they make deals over and around your head. So, and I wouldn't say that was a hard-learned lesson. It's just eye-opening for me, because some people think they have absolute authority and nobody does.
So now that you know that, how do you act differently?
How I act differently? I stay in very close communication with our leadership, both on the House and the Senate side. I've always had a perspective that I would try to do bills that were bipartisan. It just makes it easier. And I think that's why I've been so effective on even hard things like the Crown Act, which can't pass in certain states. The unlawful summoning bill, I think it was Alan Olson who was the only one that voted no. I mean, that was, when you think about this idea of people calling the police on people as a way of patrolling them and a way of controlling their movements in society, which is essentially a holdover from like slave patrols. People don't know this, but that's what it is. When you think about that concept and how difficult that would be to pass, say in like Arkansas, I've just learned to navigate it and have partners and be transparent with people. Sometimes that transparency hurts me, but I don't have to remember a lie. It's just, I just tell the truth. You know, when you're being kind of shady, you know, you got to remember what you said. I don't have to remember, because I know what the truth is. So.
What bills are you working on currently?
So the mental health bill, you know, adding a number of new mental health providers, 2949, needs some additional work. I got the sense in developing that bill that it was going to be hard to distribute funds, and I'm getting that sense now, so we may need to tweak how agencies deliver those funds.
Sorry.
Sure. So that's one. That's one piece. I get the sense there's a bit of guild protection, and that's kind of been my thing in the Business and Labor Committee. Our Oregonians, this is the answer to your earlier question, where Oregon has overreach. Our licensing processes and our ability to import labor, essentially, or people to move back home when they have, say, lived in New Jersey and they have a social worker license, our ability to get people licensed and fully employed when they've lived somewhere else is trash.
Why? What, like, who does that go through?
It goes through the boards and commissions, who, in my opinion, they have too much power and it's unchecked.
Where are you seeing that specifically?
I see it in like the social work, mental health therapist space. I see it in the Oregon Medical Board. I've seen it in, those are the two that come to mind very quickly. I see it in teaching. I had a superintendent a few years ago who had a very difficult time transferring her superintendent license. Like, that's baloney. And the way in the teaching space it's been set up is, you want to come here and then they ask you to take 1 million other classes, but you've been teaching for 25 years. Like, that's BS to me. And the impact of that, so it's not just the issue itself, but the impact of that is that we can't get diverse teachers. Maybe they've married someone and they want to come here. It's just not worth it. And we know we're losing teachers in the profession, but we can't bring enough here.
Wow.
When you say they have too much power and it's unchecked, I mean, do you think there's a motive behind that, or do you think it's just like administrative hurdles, or do you think it's just too complicated?
Well, I would say ask anyone who wanted to transfer their social work license here. First of all, if they did everything right and had to take no classes or anything else, there's no guarantee that licensure application would be processed within 30 days, first of all. So zero accountability. Second, if the board decides that you need to do X, Y, and Z, there's no one, nowhere, that person, that applicant has no recourse, like zero. And so it's this tough balance between how do you make sure that politicians or bureaucrats don't insert themselves into professional activities or the regulation of professional activities, with the state's interest in making sure that it has enough people to adequately serve the population. We know we don't have enough mental health providers of color. We know we don't have enough doctors of color. We know we don't have enough doctors, period, especially in rural areas. And so this like bureaucracy that the boards and commissions are addicted to, perhaps it's an addiction to power, I don't know. But I'm like, if our kids in Lincoln City can't see a doctor when they need to, like, that's not okay with me, and we have to fix that.
How has Measure 110 changed life in Clackamas County, if it has?
I'll share with you this. I don't think people are seeing it the way people in Portland are seeing it, in terms of just like people literally on the streets. Where I hear people talking about it is like one-to-one their own loved ones who can't get the help that they need because of the network inadequacy of providers to even prevent people from attempting to self-medicate and get on drugs in the first place. And so that's kind of how we experience it there. That the other piece of that is the nuisance part that they talk about. So while we want to decriminalize, and I don't think jail or prison is necessarily the way to treat mental health and addiction issues, but there is a component where when people have harmed someone else, there needs to be some accountability. So throwing that all out the window is not okay with Clackamas County. So it's I think what I mentioned before in the homelessness space, they want compassion, but they want practicality, and they want people to be held accountable for their actions.
Did you vote for it?
I did.
Counterfactual, would you again, knowing what you know?
I don't like legislating by the ballot as a general principle. Would I do it?
Why?
It goes back to, I think when you think about the history of like the founding of the state, and people who were essentially not able to access economic freedom. They came from, and you can correct me if you grew up in Oregon and took Oregon history, but they came essentially from Independence, Missouri, right? And they wanted some economic freedom here. And so this idea in the Western states of setting up the citizenry to be able to put their own issues on the ballot, part of it is making sure that there's always a check on politicians, where politicians won't move on an issue, citizens can do that. But I also think the process lends itself to rich out-of-state people being able to fund something where the average person, I don't think on a regular day could affect public policy the same way someone with billions of dollars could.
Do you think that influence was felt with Measure 110?
It's possible. I'm not the expert on it, so I hesitate to get very deep on it. I think the principle for me, and this is what I can remember during that time, is when are we going to face reality that we can't jail all of our problems? So that to me was the conversation that I hope the legislature would have, and I hope we would work through over these next 3 to 4 years. It's $2 billion, I think, for the corrections budget, and that was the same amount that we were asking for with the Student Success Fund. And so when I think about where I want my tax dollars to go, I want it to go to education. I want it to make sure that we have great roads. I want a high quality of life. Do I want to spend $2 billion on incarcerating grown people? Like, nobody helped me take my kids to the doctor. But if someone who's incarcerated has to be taken to the hospital, there's like 4 or 5 people. Like, that to me doesn't make sense. And we know a majority of them have mental health issues. We know a majority of them many of them came through our foster care system. Like, there's a better way to do that. And I am all for holding people accountable. Like, you do dumb stuff. How do they say it? You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Like, I'm all for it. Like, if you did it, you got to go. You don't need to be out here. But by the same token, I think our current system is cruel.
But you're saying in prison, if you get sick in prison, you have people there to take you to the hospital, like there's services, and that those are expensive.
Yeah, they got a dude to pick you up, a dude to drive, somebody to watch you, 2 people at the hospital.
Yeah.
And I remember schlepping 4 kids to the doctor's office by myself. Or maybe with my husband's help, depending on the day, right? But that's expensive. And then we know, partially because of Measure 11, but we know that we have an aging population. If you talk to the Department of Corrections, the people that are in there now who have done some heinous things are going to cost us millions and millions of dollars.
So there's an economic argument for early release of those prisoners, because when they're in DOC, those are general fund dollars that pay for their health care. If you let them out, then they get Medicaid, which means the feds pay for most of it. So would you advocate that there should be a more targeted early release of older prisoners from just a fiscal point of view?
So everything is not a fiscal argument, and everything is not logical, right, when you're dealing with politics.
Mm-hmm.
So purely on the fiscal aspect, sure. But we don't live in a fiscal world.
Yeah.
Like, I make irrational fiscal decisions, especially when I grocery shop.
Mm-hmm.
Like last night, I bought jelly beans for my son. So people are not rational.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think when you sit down and you look at policy, you can talk about, okay, what's fiscally right and what does the public have an appetite for? And then the leadership part comes in, where you as a leader have to push people just a little bit farther than they think they can go,
Mm-hmm.
and no more. And that's to me, that's like the art and the magic of lawmaking. It doesn't always make sense, but it is what the public has a tolerance for.
Have you had a chance to either speak with or debate with your opponent,
No.
Corey? Okay. Have you tried? No? Okay.
Sorry.
Well, there was some scorn there. Can you expound upon that?
No.
Okay. She's not here, so.
Can I ask another, how has the homeless services measure and money helped or hurt or impacted, been distributed in?
I think Clackamas County is kind of pulling up the rear. If I remember correctly, and you can correct me, in okay. You know, the county has done work in the veteran space. We saw with like the distribution of like ARPA funds for rent relief, we saw very slow movement in that space. And you know, it's really quite surprising because Clackamas County does well on many things, but this one we're
Except
just,
elections,
okay.
which I wanted to ask you about too. Because I saw you had some things to say about Sherry Hall's handling of that. Is there any news on that lately? Has there? I mean, they were going to do all these inquiries. I need to follow up on this. Has there been any, efforts to fix the problem?
So I asked for the legislative hearing. I asked for it immediately. Okay, September, I was told. September comes.
This now. Yeah.
And I was like, so where's the legislative hearing? Oh, well, we were going to do it in December. And I said, no, I was very clear. What I wanted to see was what the Secretary of State had done and, you know, potentially other counties that had had floods, because it wasn't just Clackamas County. I think
but this
there were multiple incidents. But what I wanted to see was an ability for government to ensure that we had safe and secure and elections that we could all believe in. And we worked really hard in Oregon to have access like no other. And so to have those things happen in Clackamas County that affected me and affected a bunch of other people who stood up and put their names on the ballot, I didn't think was fair. So, so it sounds like it'll be in December, but I'm not happy about it.
So one question that I think has been debated, but maybe not, is that in Multnomah County, the elections clerk is appointed by the board. Should the elections officer be in a big county like Clackamas County be elected or appointed?
6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. Because if you don't watch them, you don't monitor them, you can still get crap. Or if you have, you know, an election and people don't even know what that person does, then you can still get crap. Like, I think the lesson here was everything that's on the ballot matters. Down to your fire district, your water district, your soil district, your election supervisors. Like, you know, I'm an advocate for civics because people need to know what they're voting on or not voting on. And it's easy to vote in Oregon.
Did that hurt? Well, that mess out there affected your race, right? In your primary?
Well, I didn't have an opponent.
You didn't have an opponent, okay.
But there's certain things you can glean even from an unopposed primary. You can glean voter excitement, voter apathy. You can glean which districts, which precincts turn out and how heavily they turn out. You can see how people vote down the ballot.
Sure.
So there's a lot of, and I'm no election scientist because there are like super genius people for that. But
we won't ask about ranked choice voting, which is what we're working on right now. It's you need a electrical engineering degree to understand that.
Hey. You know, I I just think keeping it simple. So I mentioned my daughter's in Georgia, and I asked her, so are you going to vote here or are you going to vote in Georgia? And she said something pretty profound. She said, Mom, you have to stand outside, and they don't let people bring you water or food. And I'm not doing that. And I said, but that election is important. And she said, I know how to vote in Oregon. It's easy. Just send me my ballot. And I thought and I said out loud, that is what voter suppression looks like. You've just named it. And so in speaking out here, flubbing an election is voter suppression, in my opinion. And we can't have that happen again.
We'll see how this one goes. Right, I mean, we got the ballots printed this time, right? And I guess we'll find out.
It ain't none of my business. I said what I said, and that's the job of the Secretary of State, to monitor.
She was
and
going to do an
ensure-
inquiry too, wasn't she, or some sort of?
You should ask
I'm
her.
gonna ask, yeah.
She's not on the ballot this time, but I think what's really important, and what I think is important is that those of us who have these jobs, even though they don't pay well, they're important, and that the public should be asking more questions more frequently and kind of holding the systems, not necessarily like being like vitriolic or anything like that, but what is the system supposed to produce? It's supposed to produce a fair and safe and confident election, and I don't know that it did that last time.
All right.
Is that?
Happy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, we have one lighter question.
Okay.
If the world were ending tomorrow, what's the last food you would eat? Not meal, just food.
Oh, is today the 30th? What's today?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that relevant?
Oh gosh, I would have time to fly my mother here, and she could make me some fried fish with grits.
Mm.
Like, she makes the best fried fish, and it's got bones in it. And it's, my husband doesn't know how to eat it, but it's hard fried fish in a skillet, a black cast iron skillet with grits, and then she always makes fatback. And Sunday's her birthday.
Oh man. Okay.
So that's why I would like fly her in, so she could cook for me for her birthday, right?
Where does she live?
She lives in D.C.
Okay.
I forgot to ask, how old will you be on October 17th?
Y'all always ask that.
I'm gonna be 57. How's that?
I told him
Can't be
last
worse
time,
than
you
that.
never ask a
Come on.
woman's age. I was born in 75, so whatever that is.
Year 7?
47.
47?
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
that, I don't keep up.
Don't keep track. Yeah.
It's the best policy.
Yeah.
Can you spare me 5 minutes for an unrelated story?
Sure.
Okay.
You want us to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where did you study electrical engineering?